How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Somebody revved up a chainsaw outside my window, like right as we started this. This is kind of creepy.
Like a chainsaw. Skin your ass raw.
And if my day keeps going this way, I just might break your fucking face tonight. Give me something to break.
Man, I've been on a Limp Bizkit kick for the last 21 years, I think.
Well, I can't think of a better way to start the second part of our Alien episode than with a little reminiscing about Fred Durst and the great Limp Bizkit. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock, a podcast dedicated to the history and evolution of cult and genre movies. I am but one of your hosts, Gary Horde.
I am but two of... Wait, no, that doesn't work. I'm still only one of your hosts. Yeah. I'm still also one host, but not Gary Horn. I am Justin Bishop, joined by our third host. I don't know where
I am also a but one host.
He is a but one.
I'm such a but one.
Anyway, that's Mr. Todd.
Say that
Davis.
right?
I don't know what he's saying.
That right?
No, Todd. Mr. Todd A. Davis.
Hey,
welcome back to the show. I'm glad you're here because you were here for the first part of this discussion. It's good that you're here for the second part, or this would be really weird. So anyway, let's continue with our story of Dan O'Bannon, the unsung legacy of Mr. Daniel O'Bannon. Last week we discussed previously on Cinema Shock. We started discussing Alien last week. Yeah. Probably the most well-known movie. I mean, definitely the most well-known movie of O'Bannon's career, unless you count Star Wars, I guess, but he only worked on that for a couple months, and I don't even know if he's credited in the end credits. But as far as ones that are generally associated with Dan O'Bannon, I'd say Alien is up there at the top of the list. So when last we left Alien, O'Bannon and his co-writer Ronald Shusett, they'd gotten their script in the hands of 20th Century Fox and Walter Hill, who had fucked with his script and all that. And go back and listen to that episode. If you're listening to part 2 of this, you're going to be very confused. But at the end of the last episode, we had just signed on a director to direct Alien. That was a man by the name of Ridley Scott. And with a director in place, it was time to cast the film. So with only 7 human characters in the story, Ridley Scott knew that he needed strong actors in the roles so that he could focus on the film's visual style, because he is a very visual director.
Can I say something about Ridley really quickly that I love about him? One of the things that, now, of course, I'm basing this solely on interviews with Ridley himself, but who knows what he acts like on set? But he seems like, with all of these movies that we've talked about, he seems to be very much about collaboration, and he realizes the importance of everybody on set, not just himself. Like, obviously, he has a creative vision, and he talks a lot in stuff I saw about the cast. You got to feel that in your gut, and it's 50% of your problem solved if you get the right cast. They're going to help you with a lot of the decisions that get made and a lot of things that happen in the scenes. He said that with this cast that he put together, he felt like basically that he had nailed it, that they knew something special was happening right when they were going in there. Now, he wondered about how people felt about it, because he does say he can be an ass on set from time to time. But his interesting quote there was, he says, nobody respects you for being nice, and you got to get it done, and you wear what you got when it's over. So you got to make sure at the end of the day, your vision is the one that makes it on screen, because you're living with it for the rest of your life. there's going to be issues. You hear about Dan O'Bannon coming into this, and for all intents and purposes, Dan O'Bannon had no other place on set. Like, Dan O'Bannon didn't have to be involved with Jack nor shit with Alien at this point, really. And it seemed to like Scott, straight up Scott in the commentary talks about, and maybe this is a better point for later, but he says that he always felt like he was searching for Dan O'Bannon's approval on the movie, and he's not sure that he ever got it. And it's which is sad, but he said he loved Dark Star. You know, Dan had experience directing there, or just like in his collaboration with John Carpenter, and he wanted to live up to, he thought a lot of John Carpenter. He wanted to live up to what Dan was expecting. He said that he always felt that Dan's innermost feeling was to be the director, like that he wanted to take control of the whole shot, the whole shoot. He knew coming in that Scott wasn't a sci-fi fan. Like initially, he was just doing this because, as we discussed last episode, Justin mentioned that Star Wars had just happened, so sci-fi was hot, and he knew that Scott was like the fifth choice of directors, and Scott knew that he was the fifth choice, but he wanted to honor the vision of the original screenwriters, and he knew that he had initially Ronald Shusett.
Struggle with that one.
I do struggle with it every time. He had his approval. He gave him a lot of great feedback, but Dan O'Bannon was not so forthcoming with a lot of approval, and so it was kind of sad hearing that.
I mean, O'Bannon seems like a tough guy to please, honestly, especially when something is like his baby, you know, and that's what it feels like Alien is. And he felt like I think it might stem from the fact that he got fucked over so bad by John Carpenter that he doesn't want to go through that again. He doesn't want another director fucking him over and taking all of the credit for something that is rightfully at least somewhat his.
Yeah.
And I think he spent most of his career afraid that was going to happen. And unfortunately, it could kind of continue to happen over and over to him.
Anyway, so here we are, and Ridley Scott's on board. He's quite the character himself, and he gets to choose his cast, which, like I said, he views as like 50% of the movie right there, just as part of getting this right.
So as we mentioned in our last episode, in O'Bannon's earliest versions of the script, the crew of the Nostromo was all male. But he and Shusett later wrote the roles that were more generic, even putting a note in the script. If you look at the script, and I'm not sure if this was a note by O'Bannon and Shusett or by Hill and Geiler, but there's a note on the script that says the crew is unisex and all parts are interchangeable for men or women. So this gave Scott and his casting director the freedom to interpret the characters however they wanted.
Do you know what's weird, by the way, side note, is that on some anthology thing later, and I don't know if it's from this note, and you saying that kind of made me think of this, but they had included some note about Dallas and one of the other characters, and I can't remember who, afforded like transition in sex. Like it had like
it was.
Do you know what I'm talking?
Yeah, it was Lambert, Veronica Cartwright's character, and it's in Aliens. When you see, there's something about when you see, I think the list of when in Aliens, when Ripley is being debriefed, I guess you see like a list of the Nostromo's crew, and there's something about that. But it was I guess written in James Cameron's like character dossiers.
Okay.
Yeah, so which you can read, I think, on the Alien or the Aliens, like that quadrilogy box set or whatever. But yeah, the Lambert role was written as a trans character.
That's interesting. I just I don't know. I just thought that was
I had never known that before until like yesterday. I think I read that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So talking about the cast, the Nostromo's captain, one of the first roles to be cast was Tom Skerritt as Dallas. Skerritt had actually originally read the screenplay early on in the film's development. He was approached pretty early on, but he turned it down because he was unimpressed with the writing quality of the script and unimpressed with the film's budget, which at that point they were, envisioning as a Roger Corman low budget horror movie. Because he said this in an interview, he's like, I thought it was going to end up looking like an Ed Wood movie. If you try to do a sci-fi movie on this kind of budget, it's going to look like Plan 9 from Outer Space. But then after the screenplay was rewritten and the budget was expanded, he was approached again, and then he signed on. He saw the improvement and saw the potential of the project.
I saw the name Harrison Ford was tossed around in a couple of places, but I couldn't ever find a verification from someone.
I mean, I'm sure in 1977 Hollywood, after American Graffiti and Star Wars had come out, Harrison Ford's name was probably on every casting director's list for any role.
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
that probably makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, I also see something I was trying to find more information about, but apparently Scarrett pulled that thing of when he came back in of asking for a percentage of the profits too from this, which may have been the case. But Ridley says that he just loved how Scarrett chose to play Dallas. Just that
very chill.
Yeah, just that he was laid back when everybody, he felt like everybody else would have taken this role and played him as very brute and forceful and just rugged or something. And Scarrett played him with this real just easygoing personality, and he tried to stay out of arguments and just that kind of thing. And just he thought that was
very
really
non-confrontational.
Yeah. Just there to do the job, get the job done.
So for the role of Ripley, Scott wanted that character to be female, and cast in that role was a 29-year-old off-Broadway actress by the name of Sigourney Weaver. Weaver had she didn't really have any film experience before this. She appears very briefly in, I think it's Annie Hall, the Woody Allen movie. She appears in one scene, but she was primarily a stage actor and not a very well-known one at the time. She had actually originally been considered for the role of Lambert, but when she auditioned, Ridley Scott actually encouraged her to take the lead role.
Yeah, Scott swears he knew Weaver right at the beginning. The second she walked in, he swears he was sold on her. And Weaver said she was wearing her hooker boots that day, so that's probably why. But I
mean, she's already 6 feet, 6'1". She's really tall. So maybe if with added heels on, she probably would have looked pretty imposing.
Yeah. There were rumors, again about somebody like Meryl Streep was pretty close or something like that. But I don't know. In the stuff I saw, Scott was adamant that he knew it was going to be Sigourney Weaver right when he saw her. And that he felt like one of the master strokes of this movie was making her the leader, the final person, the one in charge, just her presence and authority that she carries. And that in most movies, she might be one of the first to go, in a normal horror movie. But in this one, she's the person.
Well, what's interesting about that is that she is not any kind of leader or even a main character for the first 40 minutes of the movie, probably.
Yeah.
She has these moments of
but she barely speaks early on in the movie. Nothing that would indicate, if you've never seen the movie, that she would end up being the main character.
Yeah. It's she slowly pushes her way in, but towards the time where they finally come back from the alien spaceship, there's the moments where you can see little details. She obviously while everybody's investigating the ship, she doesn't like Ash. She doesn't trust Ash for some reason. Yeah. And by the way, side note, I have my dog is named Ripley. I just wanted to throw that out there based on this character. I also have a cat named Ash, but that was from Evil Dead. But for the sake of this episode, it could be based on this android. They also tend to fight with each other. Anyway, Shusett says that the studio, for a little while, some of the people from the studio, when they were watching the dailies, didn't even like Sigourney Weaver that much. They thought she was underplaying it too much. That she didn't, she needs to be, I don't know, something more. And he said he actually went to bat for her, talked about that he and Scott all thought it was man, look at her eyes though. The eyes is where it's at. And he said he used the Orson Welles quote when he was talking about Gary Cooper. Apparently he said that camera either loves you or it doesn't, all in the eyes. And he was Sigourney Weaver just had something about her just in her face. Weaver even tells a story about being in the, when the sitting with the casting director and Scott's asking her, what do you think this movie's like? What do you feel about this? And she's like, I don't know. It feels really bleak. She said the casting director was sitting over next to her, no, just shut up. Just shut up. But Scott's I mean, that's it though. That's what this is.
You got it. That's what it is.
But another thing they did was they ran through like stuff. I didn't know this until I was watching the commentary, that they brought in like a bunch of girls from the offices and had her run through lines and like watched her act out like one of the scenes or something, and asked the women what they thought about Sigourney Weaver. And people were like comparing to Jane Fonda. There were like other comparisons, but like some of the women were just like, wow, she seems tough, you know? And they actually took that as even more encouragement that we've got the right person, that was like, the women are behind this one.
That's cool.
The thing that stuck out to me was when the crew is coming back from the alien ship and she's keeping them in quarantine, but Ash lets them in. Her voice is so calm. You see her kind of stepping into that leadership role of, hey, I know this is going to be scary. Yes, he's, got this thing attached to his face, but we have to maintain the quarantine. And then later when she starts hollering at different members of the crew, like you see the range and just she gets, this leadership role thrust upon her. And it's really fascinating to just watch the eyes. I mean, if you watch her eyes throughout this entire show, it's really fantastic.
I mean, she portrays more authority than Dallas ever did.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like she has more leadership qualities that we see here than Dallas ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that moment you're talking about where she's refusing to let them on the ship, that's like the first step of, hey, she's making a better decision than Dallas is.
Yep.
As the captain, because she's following protocol regardless. And it turns out when you break quarantine, bad shit happens.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought?
Yeah.
I feel like you got something behind that, Justin.
So she had originally been called in to play Lambert, but got cast as Ripley. Veronica Cartwright had originally auditioned for Ripley, and she got cast as Lambert, which I thought was pretty fun. So, and then of course, as Brett, one of the Nostromo's engineer, is the great Harry Dean Stanton, who is just one of the all-time, just one of my favorite actors. I just love that guy. I love his face.
Everything about him just seems cool.
Right.
He's so cool, man.
Right.
He really is.
Ridley Scott says his very first words, Harry Dean Stanton's first words to him during the audition were, so I feel like you've got to know a little bit about what you're doing when you come into audition. But he said Harry Dean Stanton's first words to him during the audition were, I don't like science fiction and I don't like monsters.
But then Ridley Scott's like, yeah, neither do I.
As Scott said, he was amused by him, and he ended up trying to convince Harry Dean Stanton to take the role.
That really was Scott's response to that. He's like, neither do I, but I think I can make this one work.
But yeah, like, I mean, even during the commentary, like Harry Dean Stanton's just like so laid back. He's in there with like his little sections are with like Tom Skerritt and Cartwright. They're like talking about how Stanton's like, I just remember this one time where my character would say right after every time this guy said something. So I'd say right. And then, yeah. And he's like, I just thought that was a nice little touch that he'd be like busy doing other stuff and he'd just say right all the time. And then one time, like, I think he was talking to Skerritt. He's like, and then you were like in the middle of like the scene, you were like, why do you keep saying right after everything he says? And I'm like, why don't you go fuck yourself? And then Skerritt stood up and was like, if he gets to change lines, then I get to change my lines. And then Scott's like, all right, everybody calm down, Harry. Stop it.
Oh man, that's great. I really love Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah.
So the Nostromo's
Scott,
other engine.
Well, I just was going to say one other thing that I thought was very interesting is Scott said he was like also the nicest guy in the world, that like there's the scene where like they're doing the whole, the whole scene with the water coming down and the chains and everything, which by the way, Scott says he fought for. Everybody was like, this scene makes no sense. Like, what room is this in a ship that water's pouring down and there's chains hanging everywhere? And Scott's like,
I'm going to assume it's condensation from the cooling.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says condensation. And who gives a shit? It's a cool looking scene.
It looks cool.
Yeah.
He said that they got him to play all of this up. And by the way, on the special edition, there's a scene there that's cut out in the normal version where the alien is sitting on the chains. like curled up, just like watching him the whole time. And it's pretty fucking wicked. That's the one scene from the director's cut. We'll talk more about that later, but that's the one scene I'm like, it's pretty fucking wicked. Anyway, he said that they killed him and everything was done. And he was just like, Harry Dean Stanton. The only feedback he ever from that point on got from Harry Dean Stanton was Harry Dean Stanton walked up to him and was like, "Hey man, thank you so much for doing all those close-ups of my face." It was just like, cool. All right. He's like, so he's really pleasant. I don't know. He was just happy we took close-ups of him.
So the Nostromo's other engineer, Parker, was played by the Yaphet Kotto, the late great Yaphet Kotto, just died about 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah,
at the age of 81. He is. I love. There's another actor. I just love him. I mean, this is probably his most well-known role, I guess. But a few years earlier, he had been the villain in James Bond in Live and Let Die, which is not the best James Bond movie. It is the best James Bond theme song, but Live and Let Die it's a fun movie, but it's got it's one where they try to take some like blaxploitation elements to it. And then he plays Mr. Big. He turns into Mr. Big at the end, which was like, I think Rick Baker's very first makeup job. And it's not very good.
I totally forgot about that, but yeah.
But that's Yaphet. And he's incredible. There's something really commanding about his presence, but he's so natural. That's what is all of this cast, I think, is they bring a natural like element to their performances. They feel real. Part of it's because of how they look, but because they don't look like your typical Hollywood cast, but they all have this way of performing that feels just very real. Like you believe that these guys have lived together for months and months on a spaceship together. He was known to be kind of difficult on set, and he would antagonize other actors like purposely to get a performance out of them, like specifically Sigourney Weaver. He would try to get her energy level up, especially like in the scene where he says, like, I'm just for killing the goddamn thing, where they're like going back and forth. He was like intentionally antagonizing her to get her angry and sounding angry during that scene.
Well, I was actually about to break that up, that I saw later that apparently was something he and Scott had talked about, that Scott had instructed him during that scene standing around, like, to keep cutting her off, interrupt her, like in the middle of her speaking her lines, like, try to
see
fuck
that
with
scene
her.
when I mentioned last week about some of the stuff felt really natural. That's the scene I had in mind, and it was just like, was that scripted? Because that feels so real.
It does. It's really good.
Yeah.
But Ronald Shusett says that one time during the filming, like they're standing there and Yaphet came up to him and was just like, "Thank you so much for this. Do you know I've been waiting 15 years for this?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I've been waiting 15 years to be in one of the all-time great movies."
Oh, that's
He gets quite a compliment.
And I just thought that was awesome. And then Shusett says the same thing. He was just like the foresight on him. Like it was really incredible.
Wow. That's crazy. And then, of course, we've got John Hurt cast as Kane. John Hurt, another actor who wasn't very well known at the time. Of course, he's incredibly well known now.
Yeah. It looks
Kane
like a damn kid here.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I mean,
he looks super young here.
He looks younger than he does as like Ollivander and Harry Potter.
Sure.
But he's 39 here, and he looks older than 39 in this movie to me. Because I'm 39 and I feel like I look younger than what John Hurt looks like in this movie. He looks like he's had a harder life than I have at this point in his life.
He was one of those guys they went after too. Like they tried to get him, and then
he wasn't originally cast, right?
Yeah, I mean they wanted him, and he couldn't do it because he had a job, and so they ended up hiring this guy John Finch, and Finch ended up getting sick right before they started filming, and
while they were filming,
had diabetes. He found out he had diabetes.
Oh, geez.
And he had to go off of the movie.
Ridley Scott tells a story. Sorry to interrupt you, but Ridley Scott tells a story where John Finch, they were actually filming a scene with him, and he just has no energy and like looks awful. He's like yellow, and Ridley Scott says they stop the take and they're like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "I am not okay. Like I feel awful." And they had to like lift him out of his seat to help him off set. But yeah, he ended up finding out he had diabetes, and I guess his blood sugar was low, and he ended up dropping out of the film because of it.
So then what they ended up doing is because John Hurt was supposed to be filming this role in Africa, in South Africa. He had been confused, he thinks, with John Hurd, like Home Alone.
Yeah.
Like the dad in Home Alone. And, who had been
other stuff besides Home Alone.
But that, you know what I'm talking about when I say the dad in Home Alone.
Yes.
Yeah. But he said that he was on a blacklist and or he couldn't go to work in South Africa. I'll just be honest with you, I'll be straight up. I felt weird about saying the blacklist and Africa all in the same thing. So, anyway, but he was on a list, he couldn't act in Africa, he couldn't come work there because Hurd had been very vocal about opposing apartheid. And so they didn't want him there. So Hurt was like, I also opposed it, but I don't think he's I wasn't on a list. I hadn't been overly protesting it or anything like Hurd has. So I think that's where the confusion was. Anyway, Hurt couldn't do the job. And so when Scott and stuff found out about that, they approached Hurt again and came and got him and talked to him the night of. He literally drove all night that night after they got the call and came and worked on it.
Well, yeah. Ridley Scott went to his house and they went and gave him a pitch. No time to read the script. He's he pitched the film to him, and John Hurt was, he liked it, and he was like, okay, let's do this. When do I start? And Ridley Scott's tomorrow morning. so he went on set the next day, had not met any of the other crew members or anything at that point. And
wow,
for one of probably the most well-known roles of his career. And then you had Ian Holm cast as Ash, the cyborg science officer on the Nostromo.
Spoiler.
Well, we're hoping everyone has watched the movie at this point. But Ian Holm was another guy who, we know him now because he was in the Terry Gilliam movies, The Hobbit, and all that stuff.
Right.
But at the time, he was pretty much just a stage actor. He'd done a little bit of television here and there, but he was mostly a stage actor. And then we really have to mention a guy named Balaji Bodejo. So this is an actor who he is the actor who plays the alien. And he was a Nigerian artist who was working as a graphic designer in London when a member of Ridley Scott's casting team spotted him in a pub. And at 6'9", he was picked to play the part due largely to his height. And he was very thin and had very long legs. So Alien, is really he's not like an actor. He's not a stunt man. He didn't go on to have a big stunt career. Alien is his only film credit.
Yep.
And his family would later reveal that he actually returned to Nigeria in 1980, right after this movie, and opened his own art gallery there, which he continued to run, I think, through his death. He died he died pretty young, I believe. I forget why, but yeah, I mean, that's another stellar casting choice because just, you can't just cast anybody in that role or it's going to look like a man in a suit because of his proportions, because he is very thin, very, very tall, very long limbs. Even when you put the man in a rubber suit, it doesn't look like just a guy in a suit,
Right.
Yeah, it's so weird. I kept seeing his height listed everywhere from 6'9" to 7'1", so I never could figure out.
Either way, that's
exactly
incredibly.
He's a very tall man, and supposedly they had him do some Tai Chi and mime classes or something to kind of learn how to slow down his movements a little bit as they were getting him in there. But yeah, I mean, you can find quotes from him from right around the time after the movie where he says acting wasn't really his calling necessarily, but he's going to go back into graphic art, and he's unless another movie comes along. So it seems like he's open to the idea. But anyway, poor guy could not sit down. They didn't realize that till they were already filming. He had that big
tail on the back of his suit. Yeah.
Finally, somebody noticed. They're like, "Hey, man, guy can't sit down." So they had to build a special swing for him on set that he could go sit in. But
tire or wooden plank.
but at this time, with Star Wars and everything, I mean, the studio had pitched people like Peter Mayhew and stuff for this role, and so it's interesting they found this guy, and just out of nowhere, he's beating out Peter Mayhew to play this role. Just which, I mean, no, it's perfect.
The thing with this cast, I mean, this cast is incredible. Like I said, they bring a really natural vibe to it in their performances. But I think also it's because they're not like a bunch of young kids, you know. Sigourney Weaver was 29 at the time, and she was the youngest of the cast. I think Veronica Cartwright was just a few months older than her. Tom Skerritt's like 46, you know, like Harry Dean Stanton's in his early 50s at this point. If you were casting this movie now, if Hollywood was making this movie now, everyone on the crew of the Nostromo would be like under 25 and just sexy movie star looks instead of like looking like fucking Ian Holm.
Well, that's what my first thought was, like, they're actors, not movie stars. They're in that they don't look. They look like a group of
like
miners.
real people.
They look like they're working in space.
Truck drivers in space.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I think that's Ridley Scott said that's 50% of the job. And by casting like real actors in these roles, like that leaves him to work on the visuals and the pacing and all the other things that make this movie great, because he already cast great actors who, I mean, he still worked with the actors to get certain things out of their performances, but he didn't have to work as hard at that because they were already good at what they did.
Ridley Scott seems fun too, that he has like all of these other ideas, like while he's filming the movie, you know, stuff that he's not even putting in the movie itself. But, you know, like kind of the opposite of actually what Dan O'Bannon kind of talked about, like, you know, in the last episode we mentioned, like, he was just like, I don't give a shit where they come from or like whatever. Scott talks about like filming and having ideas that like there's these interpersonal relationships that they all have to, that he thinks they should kind of convey. Like, I think he even had at one point like a sex scene pitch from like Dallas and Ripley that they would have had a relationship. Like,
this is like a studio note.
What's that?
This is a note from the studios.
This was Scott saying like he actually like had thought of that. Like he
thought of that.
He thought of that like he wanted to show like some of the passing of the time, like some of the stuff later. And I think later in Prometheus, he kind of plays on that a little bit, like with the captain there. And anyway,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway,
the better
Prometheus.
Less said about Prometheus, the better.
But just that they'll pass the time. He says even, I mean, and I swear this is in the commentary, he says even like with Veronica Cartwright and Sigourney Weaver, that they'd like had like a deeper relationship, that they were, he said that they even pitched like, that he was just saying like early on he had considered like maybe one of the first lesbian like couples or something, like just early on, or maybe they weren't even couples, but just that they were open to that kind of relationship when you spend like years in space. You know?
7 people on a ship together for years, not a lot of options, man.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what he's saying. It's like just different ways they pass the time, basically.
Yeah. So as the film moved towards production, O'Bannon's influence on the project waned. Walter Hill had trimmed his script, even changed the names of some of the characters, changed most of the dialogue, and Ridley Scott was fine with those changes, but he still wanted O'Bannon to take another look. He still valued Dan O'Bannon's input. And O'Bannon said, quote, "So I went through and repaired some of the damage, but because I had been ordered not to go back to the original, some of the best moments were lost. It was a sad degrading of my screenplay. I was convinced the picture was ruined." You know, even at this point in time, before shootings are just about to begin, like Dan O'Bannon is still, and this is me being an armchair psychologist on this, but I think it's because of the way that he got screwed with John Carpenter that he's just overprotective of his work. I mean, honestly, if you're a screenwriter in Hollywood, that's the nature of the job.
Yeah, they tell any writing class that you sit in, it's like, look, when it comes to screenplays or comic book scripts or anything like that, it's a collaborative effort. Your final draft is probably going to change, and it's just the nature of it. It's not meant to be a personal attack, but it's those changes most of the time end up making it better.
I mean, some of the time.
sometimes they make it
most of the time, but
sometimes they make them better. Sometimes it's better. Well, it's good to have that. It's good to have that objective third party to say, hey, this may not work. This one thing you've got here might not work. It might be better to change it to X. That's always good to have.
Yeah. It's always good to have other people giving you notes or making suggestions, but I think he felt slighted. He felt like they were taking something he'd worked very hard on and turning it into something that he had never intended. So principal photography for Alien took place at Shepperton Studios near London from July to October of 1978. And O'Bannon was there. He hung around on set, getting into everyone's business and even sometimes giving orders because I guess he thought he was the director. He actually at first did not like the direction of the film. He had envisioned kind of a fast-paced comic book style, but Scott's style was more atmospheric and a slower, more methodical pace than kind of what O'Bannon had envisioned when he was writing the script. Sometimes they'd be watching dailies and he would yell, "Too slow." And Scott would have to like take him to the side and be like, "Hey, I appreciate the criticism, but that might be better if we were to do that in private instead of just, screaming it out in the middle of dailies." Now, there are later interviews with O'Bannon where he says that, he was watching dailies and he started to see the movie come together and was happy with what he was seeing.
Yeah, it's just tough. You got to imagine that's just frustrating for Scott. Like I said, he was secretly had this desire to please O'Bannon, and there's just no pleasing O'Bannon.
There is no pleasing Dan O'Bannon. Dan O'Bannon, he would make suggestions and offer criticisms, none of which endeared him to Scott or anyone else on set, but it didn't get him like kicked off. Like they still let him hang around. What did get him kicked off of the set was when he thought that his typewriter had been stolen. So he had like a secretary there, and he would dictate his thoughts to the secretary. She'd type them on his typewriter. When he went into his office one day and found his typewriter missing, and he got upset, and he stormed into a meeting between Scott and the producers, and he saw his typewriter in there in that meeting. And then in typical Dan O'Bannon fashion, he'd let his temper get the best of him. He flew into a rage about his stupid typewriter, and Scott told him to calm down. He's like, "We just borrowed it, man. We're going to give it back. We just needed to use a typewriter." But O'Bannon was not easy to settle down once he got into a fury. And so a few days later, he got kicked off the set and was sent back to the U.S.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah, he was hypercritical, like on the set from everything I saw. And just, he defended a lot of aspects of the movie that would become like the biggest parts of it. Like we talked about with the facehugger thing. He brought on Ron Cobb, who like designed the interiors, that kind of thing. Had to, he was a big advocate for H.R. Giger's designs that were used and that whole thing. And, but he would nitpick a lot was their problem with him. And like Justin said, until he lost his temper with Scott was his biggest advocate, and finally lost his patience with him. They sent him on, like producers. None of them were like big fans of him being on set at all. He had tried to after the first week of shooting, he was like wanting to like get copies of the dailies or like view the dailies. And Gordon Carroll was the name I saw. Is like
Gordon Carroll. He is part of the Brandywine Productions.
Right. He said he refused them. It was like, "You're not getting these."
But O'Bannon got around that by going into the projectionist booth and watching the dailies on his own. And he's like, "If they won't let me in there, I'll just go and watch it with the projector."
But those guys in Walter Hill and everything, they had no respect for O'Bannon. They ignored him and gave him no credit. Like after the movie became famous, like they all were not fans. Scott still speaks fondly of him, but
Scott was a fan. But before he went home, though, O'Bannon did have one more crucial contribution to the film. So he was worried that Ridley Scott wasn't in tune with the horror of the day. Which he was right. Ridley Scott was not a horror guy. He was not a horror filmmaker. He wasn't a sci-fi filmmaker, but he felt that in order for Alien to be successful, it had to have some shock value. It had to have something to like really get in the audience's face. So O'Bannon set up a screening of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love how we're going full circle on this.
Yeah.
And he said to Scott, "You're not going to like this film, but just see it." He's like, you just have to watch it. So Scott watched the film in a screening room on the Fox lot. Walter Hill joined him. Walter Hill actually walked into the screening room. He's like, "Hey, what you got going on here? What are you watching?" And he's got like a Coke and a cheeseburger. He's going to eat. And at the end of the movie, the two of them sat, they watched the whole movie. At the end of the movie, he had not touched his Coke, had not touched his cheeseburger. Like, they were both entranced with this movie. And that kind of got Scott in, like, it kind of got him to think, like, we have to have that something that, like, really just grabs the audience. So when it was over, Scott was ready to shoot that scene, that shocking scene in Alien, the biggest scene, the most well-known scene in Alien. And that was the chest burster scene.
Yeah. Scott says the thing that nailed me to a wall was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was so shocking to me. The places they went that no one else had ever gone before. He said the things he remembers during that time were that movie. And he said the other film that he would give credit to is The Exorcist. He said he did see what Friedkin had done, and he thought he had nailed it too. He said to just take it like just a mundane, unlikely scenario, and then making it like turn into this terrible like scenario, like just the whatever. He just thought these two films were like iconic, which they are. And
he was right.
Just like he's like, it's kind of sad because he talks a little bit about it there. Just like, it's kind of sad because there's so many horror movies and people just settle for less. He's like, but you got to keep making movies, I guess. But he's like, those guys, there was real art there with what they were doing.
So in the script, the chestburster scene, all it said was like, this thing emerges. It didn't have any like it didn't have a lot of like detail on what the thing looked like or anything like that. And the cast, when they were filming it, they had no idea really how the scene was going to play out. And this was intentional. Like, Scott wanted genuine, terrified reactions from the cast. So they kind of got John Hurt set up separately. Everyone else was out of the room. They were away from the set. They put him in like an artificial chest. Like, it's an effect that we've seen before, like on our Tom Savini series with the zombie movies, you know, where you've got an artificial chest and the real head and shoulders coming out. So they did that. And then they bring the cast in. The cast doesn't know what's going on. They don't know how the scene's going to play out. Cause again, the script is pretty vague about it. And the way the cast describes it is that they walk onto the set and John Hurt's laying there, you know, with it sticking out of the table. And the whole crew is in raincoats. Everyone's wearing raincoats. And then there's this horrible smell of formaldehyde in the room. We mentioned this earlier, maybe on our I think it was last week's episode. And instead of using prosthetic effects, because Scott was worried they would look too fake, because again, this is late 70s, you know, prosthetic effects aren't as advanced as they are now. They were using organs from a butcher's shop. So I think, Todd, you mentioned, you know, the face hugger later on when they examine it, and those were oysters. Well, they did that for like the innards for John Hurt, for the inside of the egg. You know, the egg, when the face burster, the face hugger hits him, that was the inside of the egg was like a cow's stomach and tripe.
Yeah, it was like the lining of it. They called it the stitching or something like that.
Tripe is stomach lining.
Yeah. And then what came up out of the thing and hit him in the face was like an intestine.
It was a sheep's intestine. Yeah. So that the little thing that jumps out, and they used like an air cannon to just basically shoot it out and then slowed it down and reversed it. And so that you could, because it was too fast when they originally filmed it. Wow. But yeah, so they're using, you know, obviously there are prosthetics of the face hugger itself is like something they built, but they're using real organs and stuff. So they go into this room where they're using that for John Hurt's innards, and it just stinks because they've kept this stuff in formaldehyde, and it's just organ meat from the local butcher in London. So they start filming it. Again, the cast has no idea what's going on. The alien starts to come out. You can watch this footage, this behind the scenes footage. But the alien starts to come out, but it won't burst through the shirt. They can't get it to go through the shirt, so it's just like blood spatter. Oh. And then they tried it again, and when it does burst out, like nobody in the cast was really ready for it. And so the look you see on their faces of them just being shocked and terrified is real. That's real shock. That's what Scott wanted. He wanted a true reaction from them. And Veronica Cartwright, like, she actually got like a spray of blood hit her in the face, and she actually like fainted. She passed out from the shock of it.
Jeez.
And her reaction is my favorite. I mean, the look on her face when that happens in the film is like, you can tell like she is truly like terrified for a moment.
She says like they went in there. She was like, we'll do it like a quick take. There's like 4 cameras. We'll just get this done. You'll probably get a little blood on you. She was like, we didn't even know what was happening. And she's like, they had a fucking jet pointed at my face. It just happened. And Harry Dean Stanton is like there, and he says this, and I can believe 100% it's true because I imagine Harry Dean Stanton just being high as fuck or something on set. He's just like, I thought it was real. I was like, what the fuck? Like, just
real.
The movie filmed on 3 principal sets. There was the surface of the alien planetoid, the interiors of the Nostromo, and then the derelict spacecraft. And they created these 1/24th scale miniatures of the planetoid surface and the derelict spacecraft. Those were created by the art director, Les Dilley, based on H.R. Giger's designs. And then the art director would scale them up to be built out of wood and fiberglass on set. And then they brought in like tons of sand and plaster and fiberglass and rock and gravel into the studio. Because remember, this is at Shepperton Studios, not on any kind of location, to create the planetoid's desert surface.
that Giger design for the ship was from Necronomicon. Scott says they found that in Necronomicon. He was like sitting on set.
The crescent moon shape.
Yeah,
ship.
yeah. He says he was just thumbing through, and there was like a picture in there that was like an instrument, like a musical instrument. Giger had drawn, and he just saw it as the ship, so like took it, in to get it mocked up and everything. I love too, by the way, just the idea of like when he's shooting that, he thought that the model that they made wouldn't hold up, and this is, since we're all about this crafty outside the box thinking like we were on Dark Star. I thought this was amazing. He said the model's not going to hold up to criticism like on the look of it. So he said he took a handheld camera, like just a standard handheld camera, and filmed the model like up close and like tried to make it wobbly and that sort of thing. And then he took that, it was shooting into the monitor, and then he filmed the monitor of him like filming the model, so that he could get the look of like through the helmets.
It's a cool shot.
Yeah, I know. I just thought that was amazing. I was like, he was like that. Just hearing him talk about that, I was like, that's fucking fantastic. I would never think of shit like that. I guess that's why he's Ridley Scott and I'm not.
And you're Gary Horn.
Yeah. But it's just
I
do
love that shot. I have always loved that shot where it looks like you're looking at a television monitor, like footage of that. There's something about it that feels very like found footagey,
Oh yeah, very much.
That I think is just really cool, And also when they did build like part of the exterior of the Nostromo like full size. They built like the like feet that it like lands on, and when they were filming it, Ridley Scott was not sure that it looked big enough. So he actually got his son and the son of the cinematographer to dress up in small spacesuits, like their size spacesuits, so that when you see the astronauts outside on the planet's surface, it's actually the children, because he wanted them to look smaller next to this giant thing. Same thing happens later on in the space jockey room. He did the same thing because he wanted the room to look bigger than it actually was. So he filmed children in their spacesuits.
Well, J.J. Abrams did the same thing in Star Trek in 2009.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. He shot, he had Kirk running away from a big alien chasing him on the snow. And when you see him from the back, it's a kid.
Huh.
Yeah. There's your Star Trek reference.
I'm sorry, I don't want to get into a discussion on Star Trek. I was about to ask a question about it. And I was like, that'll take another 5 minutes.
No.
He gets paid to a planet, basically. It's where he meets Scotty. But no, I mean, Spielberg does, he uses a little person in the shark cage, like a smaller shark cage with a little person in it with the...
Well, that's because they were using a normal shark
footage.
and not a 2,000-pound great white in that scene.
Right, yeah.
But yes, same concept. So Eventually, Giger himself would also be a fixture on the set. He was no longer content to just simply mail in images of his artwork and get them stopped at customs at LAX or in London at this point. He actually showed up. They had him working on set. He physically sculpted and painted sets for the film, like the space jockey room. He airbrushed the space. He carved and airbrushed the space jockey himself and airbrushed by hand that entire room himself. So essentially, that set was one giant piece of Giger artwork created by him, which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about.
Did any of the pieces of the set survive?
I doubt it. They were like fiberglass and stuff, so I don't know that they would have held up. I'm not really sure, though. Yeah, they should be in a museum somewhere. In the Smithsonian.
To his credit, to like for what hopefully Scott watched the 2003 commentary for the film. O'Bannon does in there talk about one of the great parts about it, and you kind of hinted at this earlier, was that the atmosphere that Scott was creating. O'Bannon talks about like this guy's a master at that. And he says a horror movie without atmosphere isn't pleasing to watch. And Ridley Scott is a master of atmosphere. And he says he talks about in there that he remembers seeing Scott walking around the set. He had people with incense burners like going off because he wanted to fill the area with a fog. And just to make the thick air. He said that Scott was like walking around himself with a piece of cardboard, like fanning it, to try to make the room thick. And they said he didn't even understand what he was doing at the time. But then Scott started like clipping little lights in certain areas and then filtering it with like this blue-gray thing that he would put in front of it. And he said that the result was like the color of a Giger painting. He's like, wow. he thought it was magnificent, that he just would have never thought of that stuff himself.
Ridley Scott is, like I said, I'm hit or miss on some of his films, but I think he is an incredible visual stylist. I've always thought that. And I think this is, incredible work that he's doing here because he just knew how to do it. And the thing is, he shot most of this movie. His director of photography on this is Derek Van Lent, who is the credited cinematographer on this, but truly like Ridley Scott was handling the camera himself for a lot of this film. There were some like a lot of static shots, close up things like that Van Lent would shoot, but Ridley Scott, he wanted this kind of handheld look to a lot of the movie, which I think adds another level of kind of reality to it. There's a lot of handheld camera work in this, and in those scenes, like Ridley Scott's got the camera on his shoulder. He's the one physically shooting that. Even though he's not the credited director of photography, he was essentially a co-director of photography because he's shooting it all himself. And he's very meticulous about how things look. And I think adding that bit of like fog, that bit of haze to the set adds a lot to it, because when you see light shine through it, it has a certain effect to it, but it also kind of covers up the limitations of some of the sets, because this movie was $10 million. It started out as like 4.2 or something like that. And then Ridley Scott, who makes these meticulous storyboards, he drew out storyboards for the entire film. And when he showed those to executives at 20th Century Fox, they doubled his budget because they really saw how much potential this had. But even so, $10 million for a space set movie, even in 1979, was fairly low budget. It was a significant budget for what they were trying to do, but it wasn't like this wasn't Star Wars, and they were building sets out of like pieces of, airplanes and things like that, and tubing, and they were assembling this out of junk essentially and trying to make it look like something else. Yeah. And I don't know, I think it's really cool the way that they got around that. And I think it adds a lot of texture to the movie.
Oh, for sure.
Even, Gary mentioned earlier how they Ron Cobb, I guess his original design of the interior of the spaceship was more like straight lines and stuff. They turned it into curving corridors, a lot of corners and things like that. Mm-hmm. Well, when they built that set, it was all one piece. It was like you walked into these tunnels and you got lost. You could get lost in there because it's all Like it's not like they're filming the same corner over and over. Like they built the interior of the spaceship.
Jeez.
So actors would talk about like going in, they would get turned around and get lost in there. When you walked into that set, you were there, and there was like no way out. It was claustrophobic.
Oh boy. Talk about creating an atmosphere.
Yeah.
You know, another person that was on the set there that he wasn't, I think he was uncredited, I'm pretty sure, but Scott brought in Anton First, who ends up doing like production design on Batman 89 and Full Metal Jacket. And he was on the set of Alien, like helping out. His big creation was the whole egg layer for that area. Like he created that. And he and Scott envisioned that like the placenta over the eggs was that layer of fog and light that you see that like Hurt falls through at one point. He's like looking down through. They did that because like the Who was working on a stage show next door.
Yeah. They borrowed their lasers.
So they borrowed their lasers.
Nice.
And came through. That was Anton First, like went and got him and brought him over. They set that up. And that was just cool, man. It's so cool, like even seeing this stuff, like for instance with the eggs and weird things you would not notice, like for instance, like when Hurt disturbs the egg the first time, if you look at it and you go back and see it, I've seen this movie like 5 times in the past week, but the water is going upwards on the egg, like the droplets are going up towards the opening. It's because the egg's actually hanging upside down technically, but it's just to make it eerie and weird. And,
just to make it a little extra weird.
And inside, it's like a fiberglass egg, but when you see like the inside, it like lights up when he's shining on it. You can see the face hugger in there. That's Ridley Scott's hand inside of it with a rubber glove, like moving his hand around.
Well, that was a pickup shot after production that they decided they wanted to show the egg, and they built this clear fiberglass egg, and Ridley Scott just put on like rubber gloves and was flapping them back and forth, like, to make it look like that. But you would, and even knowing that, when I watched that scene in the movie, it doesn't look like hands. I can't tell.
You can't tell.
Yeah. No.
And he says also the egg opening was hydraulic and made with like metal and tension, and like it opened up. He's like, but seriously, he's like, that would take your fucking hand off. Like, he's like, it was. Like, that was legit.
When Giger was designing those eggs, he originally had it as just like a single opening and it looked like a vagina. And they're like, we can't do that. Like, we got to show this place. We got to show this in places where, like Catholic countries, they're not going to let us show this if it's just a vagina opening. And he's probably thinking, well, what about the giant dick on the head of the main monster of the movie? But what he ended up doing is he turned it into a cross. So it's basically a cross-shaped vagina on top of the eggs. And Giger, according to Giger, he says that he purposely did that. He's like, well, now it's double obscene.
Well, no, but I was gonna say, I mean, 100%. The more you hear Ridley Scott talk about this movie, he's fucking like he's just as much of a perv. Like he tried his hardest. He talks about it. He tried his hardest to get everybody naked in the opening scene. Like they were going to wake up and be everybody's butt ass naked. And then like, they were like, no way, can't do that. Then he's like, well, at least everybody's topless. And they're like, no, come on. Like he's like, well, we'll tape their nipples. They're like, you've got to have shirts on. We're losing like 5 countries if you don't put fucking shirts on these people. And so it's just like constant. And like he straight up, I mean, he straight up talks about with Ash and like his interaction with Ripley, like where he pins her down and like shoves the magazine in her mouth. He's just like, he's getting off on this. This is him. Yeah. Like, he's just like, he's always wanted to shove something in her mouth, and like he just doesn't have the tool, so he's going to use this magazine. And that's Ridley Scott talking. So like I don't know. I saw articles where people like tried to say like when Ash blew up, it's all white and all the white liquid coming out of him. That's intentional. And I don't know.
I think it is intentional.
I was about to say, after seeing many interviews with Ridley Scott, I'm like, yeah, probably. Like that just seems like Ridley Scott. He's the one hinting at lesbian relationships between Cartwright and Sigourney Weaver, and like he also wanted to film the sex scene with Dallas, and like, oh, Scott, you're a hornball too.
Well, that scene with Ash, like the way they shot that is, it's kind of like, it's fun. It's kind of like a lo-fi, we mentioned it earlier, but the inside of his like android, the parts you see on the table really was just like fiberglass, like little marbles and pieces of like fiber optic and stuff like that. It's nothing like super fancy. And then they just covered it in like white milk, I mean, there is an animatronic Ash that you see in like one shot, but it's kind of, as Ridley Scott would put it, he calls it a little dodgy. That's the word that he calls it. A little dodgy. Same thing when you see the Ash without the head, that the arms are kind of flapping. It's like, yeah, the arms are a little dodgy, but it works. I mean, and the effect is very simple. Of course, Ian Holmes' head is through a table, and they put the skin flaps where his neck is, and then change his voice. It's simple, but it's so effective. Yeah. And it's just, it really is very, his whole reveal, I think, is very well done, where you just see that trickle of the milk on his forehead coming down. And as an audience member, if you've never seen the movie before, you're like, what the fuck is going on? What's coming down off his head? And it's not until I think it's Yaphet Kotto Parker that hits him in the head, and his head comes off, and that you realize, oh shit, like, there's nothing at all that indicates that he's a robot before that. But once that happens, it really pulls the rug out from under the audience. And of course, that would become a staple in the entire franchise later on.
Well, it's interesting too. Like, I mean, I think I mentioned it for the last episode, but just that, even with that, just the outside the box thinking that Scott was like, we're not going to be able to out technology this. Like, what's a robot look like? What's a cyborg, the humanoid thing look like inside? And he's just like, well, we just fill it with literal like caviar, I think is in there too, and stuff like that. And so he's just like, we fill it all with this, and then you're just like, well, this is more technologically advanced than anything we would understand.
It's so far advanced that we wouldn't recognize it as technology.
Yeah, it just doesn't even look, we can't explain that. So
yeah,
and then that works better than them trying to do like circuits and wires and stuff.
I agree. And it was not an easy, set to be on. You've got these spacesuits like that they were wearing. They were huge and thick and bulky, and they initially had no venting in them. I mean, you think Dan O'Bannon could have been like, hey, we kind of ran into this issue on Dark Star, but you got to let your actors breathe when they're wearing spaceships. So they would just be breathing in their own carbon dioxide. And they actually had to keep nurses on hand with oxygen tanks in case the actors were to pass out. Same thing happened with the kids. When they had the kids in the little tiny spacesuits, the kids were almost passing out until they inserted like a venting system into the spacesuits.
Wow.
So not an easy film to work on.
They figured out the ventilation with the kids.
Yeah, they figured it out. The film was edited by Terry. What?
I said, then it mattered more.
So the film was edited by Terry Rollins. Terry Rollins had been Scott's editor on The Duelist, and he and Scott intentionally left the pace kind of slow in order to build suspense for the scary scenes. And I think that's essential to the film's success. I don't think this is a slow movie in that it's boring at all. There's nothing boring about this movie, but I think that it is methodically paced to where the suspense builds as the movie goes. It gets more and more intense as it goes until by the final act, the tension is just unbearable, And I think part of that is also that Scott shows us very little of the final alien form. I think that is a very good decision on his part, because early in the film, you see the face hugger and you see the chest burster in very bright light, harsh bright lighting. You get a really good look at both of them, and that's kind of a tease because you think that Scott's going to do that with the final form, with what would later be known as the xenomorph. You think he's going to show us that in full light or a good shot of it, and he never does. He never gives us a really good shot of the final alien. And by doing that, I think Scott keeps the audience wondering. He keeps us in suspense. He knows that our imagination is going to scare us more than anything he could show us. Because again, this movie shares a lot of DNA with Lovecraft, that fear of the unknown, that unknowable evil.
Oh, yeah.
And I think by not showing the alien that much, it really plays into the psychology of the audience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and from a production standpoint, it's probably a little bit better because, I mean, didn't Spielberg do that with Jaws? Like,
yeah, Spielberg did with Jaws.
Some of it was out of necessity, but
but yes,
but I
yes,
mean,
it worked very well.
But it worked very well. Yeah.
So the original assembly cut for Alien was over 3 hours long. It was edited down to a final cut of just under 2 hours. One scene that was cut, Dallas and Brett are discovered by Ripley as she's about to escape the Nostromo. They're thought to be dead, but they've actually been cocooned by the alien. So O'Bannon had actually included this scene in his screenplay to indicate that Brett was becoming an alien egg, actually growing like a new face hugger inside of them. Ugh. Then Dallas was going to be implanted by the resulting face hugger to grow a whole new alien. And the scene was cut out for a couple of reasons. One, Scott was unhappy with the effects. He didn't think they would look realistic enough, but also because it slowed down the pace of the finale. Tom Skerritt would later say, he said, quote, "The picture had to have that pace. Her trying to get the hell out of there. We're all rooting for her to get out of there. And for her to slow up and have a conversation with Dallas was not appropriate," which I agree with, because at that point in the film, you want her to keep moving. But yeah, a shortened version of that scene was reinserted into Ridley Scott's 2003 director's cut. So let's talk about the director's cut for a second. Because Gary, did you watch this version? I know we talked about it. You watched the director's cut? You watched both versions.
I watched both versions, yeah.
So the director's cut is not really a director's cut. So in 2003, 20th Century Fox was preparing the Alien Quadrilogy DVD box set, and they wanted to include alternate versions of all 4 films, director's cuts or alternate cuts of all 4 films. This is where the famous assembly cut of David Fincher's Alien 3 comes from. So they asked Ridley Scott to remaster Alien and create a director's cut. Now, there's no indication that the theatrical cut of Alien was not Ridley Scott's preferred version. That essentially was his director's cut. But even Scott says that the version that was in this Alien Quadrilogy box set was just called a director's cut for marketing purposes, because that's what was being done in the early 2000s. You had all these director's cuts and special editions coming out, and that was a selling point to a lot of people. So studios kept doing it even when this was not necessarily the preferred version of the film by the directors.
Yeah, it's like you see this a lot of times, even now, like you said, but Ridley Scott straight up, like in the box set, multiple times, even in the accompanying booklets, the commentary, I believe even in the intro to the special edition or the director's cut, that he says there is no director's cut of this movie. He was happy with the film as it was. He got to do what he wanted to do. He said by 2003, there were things that, after you've seen the movie for a quarter of a century, there's things you could tweak. Sure. There had been scenes that people had seen on deleted scenes that fans had requested be added back in. And so he thought there were ways he could modify those and get them back in there. And so he decided to do it just to work with it, But,
yeah, I mean, it's an alternate version of the movie. It's got alternate scenes. It's actually like a minute shorter, I think, than the theatrical cut. But it gave fans a chance to see some material that they had not seen before reinserted into the film. And even though it's not necessarily like the Ridley Scott's like final version of the film, his version of the film is the one that came out in theaters in 1979, as opposed to something like Blade Runner, that's got like 4 different versions, and the version that came out in theaters was definitely not Ridley Scott's version.
Or even I've been watching through them, and like Aliens. I mean, even that one, the director's cut of Aliens is, I think, James Cameron's preferred version of Aliens. Yeah. Like the sequel, just he thought they had, the tendency was to cut movies down, and he had wanted his version to be longer, and they had made, argued with him to trim it down. So even in that one, it is the preferred version. But in Alien, it's Ridley Scott's pretty straightforward about he had no changes he wanted to make.
Yeah. I actually saw the director's cut on the big screen. It came out on Halloween of 2003. Before the DVD box set came out, they actually re-released it to theaters, and I had a chance to see it. It's actually the first and only time I've been able to see Alien on the big screen. So I've actually never seen the original theatrical cut on the big screen, which I would love to do.
That's cool. Well, I watched the original cut. I actually have the big box set, and a friend of mine.
Yeah, that's the one we're talking about, the quadrilogy.
Yeah, I've got the quadrilogy box set, and a friend of mine has an office space at a local mill here, and a big white wall. So he brought a projector and threw it up on the wall. So we were watching it, and probably 10 or 12 feet wide. And
nice.
It's not in the theater, but pretty close. And it was a lot of we had
right now.
Yeah, and we had a lot of fun. It was a really great because I think one of our friends that we were with hadn't ever seen that before.
Oh, wow.
So it was a fun viewing experience. We had a good time.
The film was released on May 25th, 1979. It was a box office hit, broke records left and right, eventually grossing $143 million worldwide. But critical reception was actually initially mixed, believe it or not. At the time, a lot of critics weren't very kind to sci-fi movies, and this was no exception. But of course, now it's considered one of the greatest sci-fi movies ever made, one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Even critics who gave it mixed or negative reviews upon its original release, guys like Leonard Maltin and Roger Ebert, later came to reassess it and recognize its greatness. I think Roger Ebert even did one of his great movies columns on Alien later on.
Wow.
But not everyone has probably reassessed this movie and seen it for the incredible piece of filmmaking that it is. And I'm willing to bet if you were to, scour the internet, the deepest, darkest corners of the internet, you might find some people who have some unkind things to say about Alien.
My first one that I ran across was Pauline Kael's review of it. And
wait,
no, Pauline Kael was very nice. I just thought it was interesting. I thought this would be fun to throw in here. She says, a quote from her review is, "It reached out, grabbed you, squeezed your stomach. It's more gripping than entertaining, but a lot of people didn't mind. They thought it was terrific because at least they'd felt something. They'd been brutalized."
Wow.
And I thought that was an interesting thing from Pauline Kael. But yeah, there's some people that apparently were not huge fans of Alien and decided they needed to get online and type something up real quick because, as it turns out, with most people on the internet, somebody needs a nap. This first review is, I don't know, I can catch the name. It's 1 out of 5 stars. They said, subject is, "I'd rather not." And and the review is, "Wow, what was all the hubbub about this movie? No thanks."
That's it.
That's the review.
That's their assessment.
And I just found it fun. Let's see here. This is from Zombageddon. 1 star. "Completely overrated. I felt nothing for these characters. The acting was plain bad, and they kept making one bad Alien movie after another with the exact same redundant plot line. I really hope they don't make any more Alien movies. It's becoming an awful franchise like Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm glad they went in a new direction with Prometheus, which is a much better film than all of the Alien movies combined." That was for Justin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Justin, you doing okay, buddy?
My head hurts.
I saw that.
Was that a real one? Was that a real review?
That's 100% a real review, and I saw it and was like, "That's going in. That's going in." Prometheus is a better movie than all of the Alien movies combined.
Let's get that cross stitched on something and get.
Oh man. Let's see. This is from Saint Just, so I'm going to assume this is Justin Bishop. Saint Justin.
Yeah.
What do people see in this film? Is the title of this review, and immediately that's the first line of the review. What do people see in this film? I am not one for horror films, though I do like this alien stuff. Nothing happens in this film. Nothing. We spent most of the time waiting and waiting for something to happen. The movie could have been cut to half an hour easy. There is a saying that says that fear is being scared of the unknown, something that the X-Files has done really well. Unfortunately, this film has tried to do this too, and it's gone too far. Rather than waiting for something to happen while on the edge of our seats, we wait and wait and wait and wait and wait We barely get to see the alien, and the special effects are pretty poor. Sure, it was a long time ago, so we can't expect too much. But look at Star Wars, which came out around the same time. They were much better than Alien, and Lucas had half the money. Alien is simply a boring movie that deserves no credit.
Whoa. That guy thinks that Star Wars was made for $5 million.
Yeah, I think so. This is from Maz. Who says, fear in its purest form. 1 star. Ridley Scott has created only the truest form of fear in the movie history. This film shows what if you were in space alone. No one can hear you. No one can save you. You are stuck with a monster tormenting you, knowing that you have no chance. It's hard to know that there is someone out for your blood, but for it to possibly be in the next room with nowhere else for you to go, you can make one wrong move, resulting in yours and possibly your crew's death. How would you like that? That's why this remains only one of the scariest sci-fi movies ever made, because in space, no one can hear you scream.
That's a good review. That's a positive review.
It felt like a Todd review. Because it 100% is a 1-star review. They gave it 1 star.
That's a very positive.
Said that.
Wow. The whole thing, the whole time I'm listening, going, yeah, all right, yeah, sure, yeah,
right.
Yeah, okay.
All right, real quick, Lids. This is from Harry Plinkett. It says, "Twisted. Scott is a lousy director, a great visual artist, but not good at directing. Giger is a degenerate who painted monsters and hellish images all his life, and the whole horror genre is, by and large, a pit of degeneracy. This film is an effective horror and does impress visually in many ways. It also has a memorable soundtrack. But at the end of the day, it is just nasty. And I am sick and tired of nasty imagery poisoning my mind. Shove it in the toilet."
Wow.
That is Harry Plinkett. And finally,
did it have a memorable soundtrack?
I mean, I thought the score was good.
I mean, it was a score, but I wouldn't say it was.
I mean, there were no like needle drops.
Yeah. Okay. To, like, all right.
Bits in Arizona at any point.
Did I miss something?
And this final review had no name on it, but it is 1 out of 5 stars. It says, "Space robots think they're above space law, and Sigourney Weaver has mother issues."
What? That's the whole review?
That's the review.
Wow.
That has been Somebody Needs a Nap.
Wow. It sure has. Well, regardless of what these folks think, I think Alien is, in my opinion, one of the few like perfect movies. Like this, everything about this movie, every element, it's one of the few times where everything like comes together and just works well together, like perfectly. You've got O'Bannon's story. It's ingenious in its simplicity. I think Walter Hill, I mean, I know O'Bannon likes to paint him as the bad guy, but I think him punching up the dialogue gives the film like a realness and a naturalness that's lacking in a lot of sci-fi movies, especially ones that were released before this.
And O'Bannon said that he had a conversation with Hill where Hill said that he thought the whole point of this movie is evil corporations. They created this whole situation. Had they not been greedy and needed to be involved in everything, they would not have interfered and like found the alien, blah, 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 blah. Which, side note, I think is a possible, I mean, it's a thing in this movie.
I mean, it's the thing that the entire rest of the franchise is completely based on.
Right, exactly. If they'd left well enough alone. O'Bannon, to his credit, giving props to Walter Hill, said he did say to Hill, "You're absolutely right." And you can imagine how I feel now butting up against a producer who thinks he's a writer.
Wow.
Woo.
Man, wow. Well, anyway, you've also got, Ridley Scott's visual artistry, which elevates the movie above its kind of intended B-movie origins. And then, of course, the design from H.R. Giger, which is completely iconic and one of the all-time great movie monsters. I think if any one of these elements hadn't been there, it wouldn't be the same movie. Even if like Hill had not come in and rewritten O'Bannon's script, it would not be the movie that we got. This is like lightning in a bottle. This is Every single element coming together. If someone else had directed it, if they'd have brought in a different writer to rewrite O'Bannon's script, if they'd have brought in, if the studio had refused to use H.R. Giger's designs, if any of these things had not been there, Alien as we know it would not be, I think, the iconic movie that it is. But it's just one of those few times where every single element works in the film's favor. The cast, the music, the visuals, the story, every single thing works perfectly in sync.
For the collaborative effort of the thing. I mean, it's all these people coming together that are so talented, that are so great at what they do. Just, it's like you said. I mean, it's lightning in a bottle. It's just from the simplest moments to the greatest moments of the movie. It's just like everybody, the thought that was put into all of it, just, I don't know, man. I think back on there's so many fun stories for this movie. We can't get to everything, but just like the idea that, like, O'Bannon, another thing he pitched to Cobb and Scott during the time was like the way that the seats wobbled when they landed the ship. Like, just that little detail I think is really cool. He's like, I was on a plane and I'm landing, and I'm like, the turbulence hits you and this plane feels like it's gonna fucking fall apart. And he's like, and then I'm watching, like, we're doing Alien, and I'm thinking of, like, every space movie just has the fucking ship just like land, like, doop, there you are, you're there, everything's fine. And I'm like, nah, man, like, what if it's not that way? What if you're not sure that every time you take a landing on some weird planet that maybe your whole fucking ship's gonna fall apart?
Yeah, right.
He's like, so there's like that whole thing. And I don't know, Scott, going into detail about the title sequences. Like, you had the graphic designers that worked on the posters and the press work and stuff. Just like that title sequence that I think is still one of the most epic title sequences that's ever happened. Just like that, it's like these weird, it almost starts off as like hieroglyphs and stuff. And that was the idea, was that it was to be there. Because Scott had, you know, say what you will about the movies that have come out since, but Scott had these ideas back at this movie of like what this all was. Where are these aliens from? Those questions, you know, like what's the space jockey? What's this? Where does it come from? He wanted to explore all that. You know, it wasn't, I don't know, you know, you could say it's good or bad, but the guy was interested in that stuff day one. He was, and so the hieroglyphs for him hinted that there was like this civilization before. Like,
yeah, I like the idea of like throwing those hints in there, but I think that they made the right decision in not trying to explore that too much in this movie, you know, because of course this movie, you know, as we all know, it produced a lot of sequels and spinoffs and whatnot. And we'll discuss James Cameron's Aliens at some point down the road. And it's definitely the best of the sequels, I think, but the rest of which range from just okay to downright terrible. But one of the things that the sequels do, including Cameron's, is they give us a lot more info about the aliens, about their origins, about their life cycle. But here, Scott and O'Bannon and Shusett, they knew that the less info that they gave, the better. It makes the alien scarier because we know so little about it. And this is kind of this is the Lovecraft angle again. You know, it's just what we can imagine is so much scarier than what they could give us. That's why I think some of the sequels don't work. That's why I think Prometheus and Alien Covenant don't work, is because they're taking away the mystery and therefore taking away what makes the alien so scary.
Well, it's even back to that review where it talks about like nothing happens, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I mean, the alien and the facehugger each probably get about 4 minutes of screen time, I think I saw somewhere. So, you know, that's all you get out of them. But I mean, Scott responds to criticism like of nothing happening for like the alien doesn't show up for like an hour into the movie. And and Scott responds to that with like, that's the point. Nothing happens for like 45 minutes because I want you to see the world that these workers function in. Yeah. It's a mining ship or refinery or some kind of freighter, and they're just waking up for some reason, and their day to day is fucking nothing. And you know, it's just standard day to day work practice. That's why it's so fucked up when all of a sudden there's a monster on the ship.
Right.
So why they might be surprised by that.
Yeah. So let's talk a minute. Well, we've already gotten, I think we've got a good idea of where Todd stands on this one, but
Sure.
Let's hear Todd's take.
I hesitate to call any movie perfect, but if you are gonna use that, this is a good one to use it on. I mean, we've already described certain aspects of the movie as iconic. I think the movie as a whole is iconic. It's just everything from everything Gary just said, from the title sequences to the feel of the sets, to the casting, to the prosthetics, to the design, everything. It's one of those rare moments where the report card on this is nothing but A pluses. And I was because it's been a while since I've sat and watched this one. I'm a big fan of the second one, and it does tend to watch a little more like an action movie. And
definitely. Yeah.
And we'll get into that later, I'm sure. But I recall this one being a little bit, I don't want to call it slow, but more deliberately paced.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if this would have the same punch, this time around. And I was sucked in. I was from the first frame. I was sucked in immediately. In fact, I think at one point, my wife and the other couple we were watching it with, I think a few sentences of discussion were had. I was completely engrossed in what was going on. I was just, every performance, every turn, every glance from every member of the cast, every drip of KY coming off of that alien. I really dug it. I mean, I'm a sci-fi guy anyway, but this is such an interesting exploration.
You're a horror guy.
Hold on. I'm a big sci-fi guy anyway, but this is such an interesting exploration in a particular vein of the everyman horror sci-fi. Like the Venn diagram on this thing is really fascinating, and it's just so good. I really enjoyed it, and it makes me want to, when we're done recording, go watch the other three.
Yeah, I watched all four of the originals a couple months ago. Actually, I just got on a kick and watched them all. I like them all to varying degrees. Of those first four. Alien 3 being my least favorite. I actually am in the minority of liking Alien Resurrection more than Alien 3. I like Alien Resurrection. I think it's silly and fun, but the through line through all of those, of course, is Sigourney Weaver. And here, this is when you watch Sigourney Weaver in this one, you're seeing a movie star being born. Like, it's not often that you can point to a movie and go, this is where that person became a movie star. And this is it. I mean, Ripley is one of the great screen heroes, action hero, horror heroes, whatever you want to call it. One of the first female action heroes. And I'm not sure that how much intention there was there, because obviously this was not written as a woman initially, but the way the character is, regardless of how it's written, by casting Sigourney Weaver in the role, it kind of becomes a feminist film. And I have to think that Ridley Scott at least was doing that intentionally, because if you read the script or you watch the movie, the men on the Nostromo are pretty fucking useless. Like they just make a series of bad decisions. Had they listened to Ripley, most of them would have probably been okay. Maybe not Kane, but the rest of them probably would have been okay if they had just listened to Ripley when she tried to keep them off the ship, she tried to keep them from bringing this thing on the ship. It would have been a much more boring movie, but everyone would have lived.
To jump ahead to something that we normally do, and the reason I want to do this is just because I want to get this out there before I forget about it. I actually just finished reading William Gibson's unproduced script for Alien 3 was given over to IDW some years ago and turned into a miniseries, a graphic novel. And I just finished reading it. And if you dig the first one, watch the second one, and then go read William Gibson's Aliens 3. It is
It's a comic.
It is a comic. It's only 5 or 6 issues, but I mean, you can find it on Comixology. It is worth a read in light of the first 2, because this was written as a direct response, a direct continuation of Alien and Aliens. So if you're not a fan of Aliens 3 as it is on screen, you may want to check out William Gibson's unproduced Aliens 3 script by IDW. It's worth a read.
Okay, cool. Is there a trade version out yet?
Yes, there is a trade version. That's how I read it.
Okay.
And it's all together, and there's some sketches in the back, so you get a little bit of bonus content and seeing how they put everything together. It's worth a couple bucks. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So this movie, by the way, it passes that Bechdel test. You know what I'm saying?
The Bechdel test. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think even the column that it came from originally, Alison Bechdel wrote, like, Dykes to Watch Out For was her column, and that was where it was first proposed. Like, the character in the column, like, it talks about a movie that treats its female characters as equals, and the rule is 3 parts. Has to have at least 2 female characters who, number 2, have a conversation with each other that, number 3, isn't about one of the male characters in the film. And so that became the Bechdel test. But the character in the column says that the last movie they remember seeing that fit that criteria was Alien. So anyway, that's
awesome.
Yeah. So this is this passes that test. So just for props there. Also worth mentioning, 2 things I found interesting. One, at the premiere of the movie, religious folk were very upset. There was a big prop of the xenomorph outside, and they set fire to it.
What?
Because they believed it was the work of the devil.
I think it was Jewish rabbis that did that.
Oh, maybe it was Jewish rabbis.
Really?
Either way, that marks successful. That marks a successful film to me.
Yeah, when you make the church people angry,
yeah,
you're doing it right.
Also, ridiculously, and I know that we have more familiarity with this, but I didn't realize it even started with Alien. But after the success that Star Wars was having with action figures, Kidder made an Alien toy after this movie for Christmas of 1979. It was like an 18-inch like alien, like xenomorph. It didn't have like the crew or any of that stuff, but it was the straight up like Giger xenomorph design, and it was apparently pretty breakable, so parents complained, and it got pulled. And it's like, I mean, it goes for like box versions of it go for like $1,000 now. But
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing in the 80s and 90s, because I remember buying RoboCop toys and Terminator 2 toys, and those are definitely not kids movies, so.
Well, I feel like I read somewhere this was like the first where they took like a rated R movie and started making toys out of it.
Yeah, I mean, that, which is so weird about this movie, because there's a ton of sexual imagery in this movie, I mean, it's that toy is of the xenomorph, the alien is, again, it's a big dick. I mean, the Giger stuff is pretty obvious, but then you got scenes like the one Gary mentioned earlier where Ash tries to choke Ripley with a rolled up newspaper, like that's a very like psychosexual image there. Or the fact that Ash is covered with a thick white liquid, like right. I think that was fully intentional. And I mean, hell, the alien itself is covered with lube. The whole movie, the entire movie is covered with KY jelly. Yep. And then to take it even further, the like sexual imagery of the film, the movie it shows what happens when a man is the victim of non-consensual sex. That's what the face hugger is. I mean, this was actually intentional on Dan O'Bannon's part, because he wanted to kind of subvert the rape revenge movies that were popular at the time, stuff like I Spit on Your Grave and They Call Her One Eye, movies, like we've talked about before. He was kind of trying to do something else by showing the man as the victim, because again, he wanted to make the men in the audience feel very uncomfortable. But
I saw stories like during the early development of that O'Bannon and Shusett, when they were working on this, they said they came to like an impasse of like, how does the alien get aboard the ship? That was like the discussion they were trying to answer. And Shusett had come up with the idea, and maybe even as a joke, said the alien fucks one of them. Yeah. And so that eventually they worked that into the facehugger concept. And then O'Bannon had the idea of like, well, now we try to take the image of like a man getting raped and impregnated, and that so they became very adamant that the first victim has to be a man to like take from that horror cliche of the woman victim, so that was very much part of that discussion.
Wow.
I mean, Dan O'Bannon, despite the fact that there were a lot of changes made to his script, that doesn't discount his significant contributions to the film. I mean, again, this was his story. It was his concept. It was his screenplay originally. It was him that came up with the chest burster scene, and Alien would not be Alien without the chest burster scene. And it was him that got H.R. Giger involved, and Alien would not be Alien without H.R. Giger's designs. But Dan O'Bannon never really received the credit he deserved. I mean, even critics who liked the film when it came out knocked the screenplay for being too thin. I would argue that its simplicity is actually one of its strengths, but at the time, people were saying that it was too thinly written, which I think that's completely wrong. I think you get to know the characters very well enough because of the performances and what you get from them to care about whether or not they live or die, which I think is what you need out of a horror movie.
It's so crazy to me to think that that's like, I don't know, because I was reading this whole article about too, how, like producers, that's not even what they're looking at most of the time. Well, like they have professional readers that like tell them what a movie is sometimes because they get so many screenplays, right? Or at least during this time, this is how it was. And so the reason I had found it because it was the readers would generally find like, what's the easy way to explain this movie? And so for this one, it was
the elevator pitch.
Yeah, like the elevator pitch. But like for this one, it was like the summary for everybody was it's Jaws, but in space.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And David Giler, who produced and co-wrote the screenplay with Walter Hill, he even diminished O'Bannon's contributions in the press after the film came out. Even if you watch him in interviews, like the Beast Within documentary, which me and Gary, I think, both watched, that's on some of the special features on the Blu-ray and DVD. David Giler's kind of a dick, honestly, but he really kind of underplays how much O'Bannon contributed to this. When if it had not been for O'Bannon, you guys wouldn't have got a script on your desk in the first place. That was his script. You guys rewrote his script, but you wouldn't have had anything to rewrite without him. So that I think that's a dick move, to be honest. And the studio even took O'Bannon and Shusett's name off of the poster at first, but then they were forced to put it on after arbitration with the Writers Guild. But they even tried to take their name off, even though they were given screenplay credit. And the bad press over this dispute and the fact that O'Bannon didn't show up in the film's promotion definitely hurt his career. Like he was not being well associated with this film, and it hurt his career. And it also meant that he wasn't invited back to work on the sequels. So then going back to O'Bannon's feud with his old pal, John Carpenter, John Carpenter told the press that O'Bannon had just ripped off The Terror from Beyond Space. He called Alien stylish, but more repulsive than scary. And O'Bannon then, of course, he bashed Halloween. He said, quote, "You can make that in a weekend with some teenagers. It's kind of nifty in a minor key. Halloween is okay."
You sons of bitch. Well, you guys, it's too late to kiss and make up now, but God, that's so wrong.
It's a feud. They're feuding.
Oh, I hate it.
So what's ironic here is that those two films, though, Halloween and Alien, are very similar. Honestly, they're both about this relentless killer that sort of represents evil personified. They don't have any motivation. You know, Michael Myers in the first Halloween, which we will definitely cover on the show one day. We covered it on our old show if you want to hear our thoughts on it, but we'll cover it in more detail one day. But Michael Myers has no real reason for stalking the girls that he's stalking in the first Halloween movie. They're just there. And the same thing with this movie. You know, Kane happens along, messes with an egg, and he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, which fucks things for everyone else on the Nostromo. It's not because they were being hunted or the alien, they have something that the alien wants. It's just what the alien does. The alien kills. It's what Michael Myers does. He just kills. So
it's nature. It's nature. Yeah. It's killing indiscriminately.
Yeah, that's just what they do. So it's kind of ironic that they were kind of feuding in the press over these two movies when in reality, the movies are very, very similar.
And very, very good. Both of them.
They're both really good. They're both great movies. So it's unfortunate that despite creating one of the most iconic screen monsters of all time, Dan O'Bannon never really got his due, even from Alien, the movie that he's most well associated with. He didn't really get to cash in on that, despite the fact that the movie, you know, it won an Oscar. It won an Oscar for best special effects. He didn't even go to the ceremony. Dan O'Bannon didn't go to the Oscar ceremony. It should have made his career, but instead, once again, Hollywood just kind of ignored him. You know, nobody really gave him his. They thought he was a hack, I guess. I don't know. I mean, maybe someone like Walter Hill had more sway because he had more produced screenplays. And so when he said that O'Bannon was a shit writer, people believed it and didn't want to give him any more work. So it's not like he was the next hot screenwriter in Hollywood after this, like he should have been.
It's tough because he doesn't ever help himself. It doesn't seem like, but he also deserves so much more credit that he gets. And so you can see some of the things that irritate him.
Yeah. So the next film with his name on the credits would come out 2 years after Alien. It's a film that reunited him with his Alien co-writer, Ron Shusett. And that film, which is what we're going to discuss next week for part 3 in this series, was 1981's Dead and Buried. It's a fun film. It's one that, you know, a lot less known than Alien, and I haven't seen it in years, but I remember enjoying it. So we'll discover if that still holds the case, if that's still the case, and you know, see if we can find some fun behind the scenes stories for you guys on that one.
There's so many more things to discuss with this film. It drives me crazy that like all of the stories that like like the cat, how they got the cat to hiss. They hit a Doberman or a German Shepherd behind a wall. And so then the cat starts to come towards Harry Dean Stanton, and then they pull the wall up, and it's a German Shepherd, and the cat hisses and runs away. And just little stupid stories like that. I just think it's so much fun. And then the ideas that Scott had that he's going to later play out, and much to Justin's chagrin, play out just about what the space jockey is and what the idea was with the carrier that the eggs are on and that whole thing. And I don't know, it feels like a whole discussion for the Alien franchise that like when I was watching the OG original commentary for the film, he's talking about, he always, from like day one, it sounds like he thought of the aliens are a weapon and they get dropped into an area and they kind of capture whatever, they integrate with whatever they're around. And so do you remember like, was it the late 80s, early 90s where there were like alien toys where you could get like the gorilla alien and the tiger alien? And like, it was just like the alien.
I mean, even in, what was it? One of the sequels had alien dogs in it, right? Was that Alien 3?
Oh, maybe that's right. Yeah. It's probably all after Alien 3. I totally forgot. It's been so long since Alien 3. We're watching through them right now, the wife and I, and Alien 3 always fits right there with Highlander 2 for me as movies. I have seen once, but started like 15 times each.
Like, are you watching the assembly cut?
I think I'm going to watch the assembly cut. Yeah. Cause I was doing this research earlier when I was trying to find out, you know, like what's cause the fucking anthology thing has, you know, the OG and the special editions of each. So I'm like, well, which one's better? You know, I
would recommend the assembly cut on part 3.
Yeah, so part 3, it sounds like Fincher, he dropped out either way, but at least in the assembly cut, they just like tried to piece it together a little bit more to what he had intended. And he still doesn't claim any of it, it sounds like. But anyway, it's at least more to what he was working on at the time. And supposedly on Reddit and stuff, people say it's a more coherent story than the original.
I think it's a little bit better. It's still not great, but it's better than the theatrical. I think it's time to wrap this up, fellas.
Wait a minute. Let's talk about one other thing.
Gary, we have been talking for 4 hours about this movie.
But I did want to say that Ridley Scott, by the way, he did fight the studio to get that last act in there. This movie was supposed to end. I just found this fascinating. It was supposed to end with her escaping the ship. And that's where it ended. And Ridley Scott never felt like that was the end. So he fought for what he called the 4th act, which was Ridley on the shuttle and the aliens still being there.
Yeah. Which is a great finale, honestly. He made a good decision on that part.
Yeah, I agree. And first of all, I don't know what size panties those are she's wearing, but they don't cover her ass crack. So that's point A. Point 2 is
point A and point 2.
Point 2 is I always wondered what was going on with the alien there, just like coming up in that little hole. Like he's just
hanging out in the air, hanging out in the he's camouflaged.
He's trying to camouflage himself. He's very slow until she notices him, and he's still kind of lazy about it. Supposedly, the concept was going to be that the alien is transforming himself into an egg. Like he's going back. It's like some kind of evolutionary thing. Like it's going to be like eventually making itself into an egg. That was like a second thing to what Scott wanted to do. And Scott's original ending, he said, was that Ripley shoots the xenomorph with the grappling hook and it doesn't do anything. And the xenomorph just lunges at her and tears her head off. And then it goes to the comms and you see it fully integrating and it's typing on the computer. And then it uses Dallas's voice to say, I'm signing off or something like that at the end of the movie.
That's stupid. I'm glad they didn't do that.
But it was something like that. So anyway, I just wanted to share that just for everybody who stuck around with us. Thank you so much. I will stop talking about Alien now.
Well, all right. Well, let's call
except for this one thing. No, I'm just kidding.
Jesus Christ, Gary. Well, where can you guys be found on the internet for our listeners?
I am at This Is Gary Horde. And I also have a wrestling show if you are interested. It's at TIPW Show. This is Pro Wrestling, and we're doing a similar thing to what we're doing with the movies right now, but we're doing it with wrestling. So if you've ever been interested in pro wrestling and where it comes from, what it's all about, I think we tell the story in a very fun way. And you can listen to that at TIPW Show. You can find all the links and the bios and stuff there. We just talked about a guy named the Masked Marvel. It's full of impersonations by me, is what that show is. Because for some reason, everybody leans on me to make impersonations of the people that we're talking about. So I have to find like clever ways to discuss them. So I have to discuss about this one guy like Joe Stecker, who was a champion back in the day, but he practiced his leg scissors, which was his finisher on farm animals. So yeah. So then I get to pretend to be Joe Stecker. He sounds a lot like this. And do my leg scissors. Don't get nasty now, Justin. I don't do nothing nasty with no pigs. You know why you don't do nothing nasty with no pigs, Justin?
No, I don't.
Because they'll squeal on you. and anyway, and then my other character, we just discussed the first masked wrestler who was the Masked Marvel, and he's just pretty much like, hey everybody, I'm here. I'm the Masked Marvel. Mask me anything. Anyway, all right, Todd, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
I'm sorry. I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. And if you like Star Trek, I have a podcast covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. It's called Computer Resume Podcast, and you can find that on Apple and Spotify and Google and on social media at Computer Resume.
Yeah. I'm at Justin_Bishop. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, or no, I am on Facebook, but don't send me a friend request. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and I don't want people.
He's all set. He's all set with friends, folks.
I'm good. I have
It's
more than I need.
I mean, I'll accept your friend request. I just probably won't see it for like 4 weeks. But
but I am on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd. You can friend request me on all those places, and you can find the podcast at cinema_shock on Twitter, Instagram. We are also on Facebook, and we do encourage you to like us there. And you can also rate, review, share this with your friends, especially if they like Alien, apparently, because we can't stop talking about it. And until next week.
I'm just thrown back by how you big leagued everybody on Facebook. May the wings of liberty, may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
How I big leagued?
Yeah, like big leaguing them.
What does that mean?
That just means you're like big time and like you're I don't know. You know where I got the term from? If you really want to know, it's because apparently before this overly PC culture. No, this sounds like I'm like trying to be anti-woke, but supposedly this was a thing in wrestling back in the day, like Randy Orton. So it's not that far back in the day. Like Randy Orton would walk into a writer's room when new writers got hired, and he would stick his hand down the front of his tights and fondle his balls, and then like reach out to shake hands with one of the writers, like one of the new writers, like, "Hey, how's it going? I'm Randy Orton." And if they didn't shake his hand, he's like, "What are you, like big leaguing me? You think you're too good to talk to Randy Orton?"
I'm not sure how that applies to me not wanting friend requests from people I don't actually know.
I'm just saying that's where the big league term came from. I'm not saying you're like rubbing your balls to people, but if you do get lucky enough to, that's why he doesn't want you to add him on Facebook, because it's all like private. It's just videos of Justin rubbing his balls.
Be excellent to each other.
Jonesy has the keys.
Join Justin Bishop's OnlyFans.